In the heart of the deep south, where the oppressive heat clings to the ancient cypress trees and the thick air carries the scent of rot and decay, lies a place that the locals dare not name aloud. This is the Forbidden Swamp, a cursed land shrouded in darkness, where the boundaries between the living and the dead blur, and where even the bravest souls fear to tread. The waters here are still, yet they pulse with an unnatural energy, as if the swamp itself were alive, watching, waiting. The whispers of the past echo through the murky depths, carried on the wind like a sinister lullaby, luring the unwary into its embrace. And within this forsaken place resides a creature born of the darkest nightmares, a being whose hunger is insatiable and whose cruelty knows no bounds. They call it the Southern Cannibal, a name spoken only in hushed tones, for to speak it is to invite its wrath. But legends are often rooted in truth, and the truth of this tale is more horrifying than any could imagine. As you step into this story, remember, the shadows are watching and the cannibal is always hungry. Venture forth if you dare, but know that escape may be impossible, for the swamp never gives up its prey. The old overgrown path leading to the swamp was rarely trodden, and for good reason. Those who had taken this route before had often never returned, their fates becoming part of the murky legends that surrounded the Forbidden Swamp. The traveler, unaware of the danger that lay ahead, found himself inexplicably drawn to the path as if some unseen force were guiding his steps. The trees loomed above him, their twisted branches, like skeletal fingers, reaching out to ensnare him. The air grew colder, and the once vibrant sounds of the forest faded into an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of his footsteps. But even those began to diminish as if the very ground were swallowing them whole. As he ventured deeper, a sense of unease crept over him, a primal instinct warning him to turn back. But it was too late. The path had already closed behind him, and the whispers that carried on the wind grew louder, more insistent, urging him onward into the heart of the swamp. The fog thickened as the traveler pressed on, a dense, suffocating blanket that obscured everything around him. It curled around his legs like the grasping tendrils of some unseen creature, pulling him deeper into the swamp's depths. His vision blurred, and he found himself struggling to see even a few feet ahead. The whispers that had once been faint murmurs now grew louder, more distinct, as if voices from the past were trying to communicate with him, or perhaps lure him to his doom. He could make out fragmented phrases and snippets of conversations long since forgotten, all overlapping in a chaotic chorus that filled his mind with confusion and dread. Panic began to set in as he realized that he could no longer discern the direction he had come from. Every step seemed to lead him further into the fog, further away from the safety of the known world. The echoes of the swamp's tortured souls were all around him now, their pain and terror palpable in every sound. The traveler's heart raced, and he began to understand that he was no longer alone in this forsaken place. Through the dense, swirling mist, a shape began to materialize before the traveler. At first, it seemed like just another gnarled tree, its branches twisted and malformed by years of exposure to the swamp's harsh environment. But as he approached, the shape grew clearer, more defined, and with a growing sense of horror, the traveler realized that it was something far more sinister. The figure was tall, unnaturally so, its form obscured by tattered remnants of what might have once been human clothing. The face, if it could be called that, was a grotesque mask of decay and malice, with eyes that gleamed in the dim light with a predatory hunger. The traveler froze, his breath catching in his throat as the creature's gaze locked onto his. At that moment, he knew that he was staring into the face of the Southern Cannibal, the monster of legend that had haunted the swamp for centuries. The air around him grew colder still, and the shadows seemed to close in, as if the swamp itself were conspiring to trap him in this nightmare. The traveler's mind screamed at him to run, to flee from this abomination, but his body refused to obey. He was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear, as the creature took a step forward, its twisted form looming ever closer. The tales of the Southern Cannibal had been passed down through generations, whispered in fear around flickering campfires, and told as cautionary stories to keep children from wandering too far into the woods. But to the traveler, these stories had always seemed like just that. Stories, nothing more than the superstitions of a bygone era. Yet as he stood face to face with the creature, the full weight of those legends pressed down upon him, crushing any hope that they might have been exaggerated or false. The old folks spoke of a man who had once been human, a ruthless hunter who had turned to cannibalism during a harsh winter when all other food had run out. Consumed by madness and hunger, he had made a pact with the dark spirits of the swamp, trading his soul for the power to survive in the wilderness. But survival came at a terrible cost, and the man's humanity had been stripped away, leaving behind only a monstrous shell driven by an insatiable appetite for flesh. The cannibal had become more than just a man. He was now a part of the swamp itself, a force of nature as relentless and unforgiving as the environment that had spawned him. The traveler, now confronted with the reality of these stories, felt the cold grip of terror take hold of him. He was not just up against a man, he was up against a legend, a being that had transcended death and become something far worse. The traveler's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing like a drum in the silence of the swamp. The creature, the Southern Cannibal, stood before him, its eyes gleaming with a malevolent intelligence that spoke of centuries of hunting and killing. There was no humanity left in those eyes, only the cold, calculating gaze of a predator sizing up its prey. The traveler could feel the weight of the cannibal's stare, as if it were peeling back the layers of his soul, exposing his deepest fears and weaknesses. The air grew thick with tension, the silence almost deafening as the two locked eyes. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, the cannibal lunged at the traveler, its movements swift and fluid, betraying a strength that no human should possess. The traveler's instincts kicked in, and he turned to flee, his feet pounding against the soft, wet earth as he sprinted through the fog-shrouded swamp. But the cannibal was relentless, its footsteps pounding behind him like the beating of a war drum. The traveler could hear the creature's breath, hot and ragged, as it closed the distance between them. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to run faster, but the swamp seemed to conspire against him, the ground sucking at his feet, the fog obscuring his vision. The traveler's breath came in ragged gasps as he pushed his body to its limits. But no matter how fast he ran, the cannibal was always right behind him, a shadow that he could not escape. With every step, the traveler's panic grew. The swamp was a maze of twisted trees and murky waters, and he had no idea where he was going. All he knew was that he had to keep moving, had to stay ahead of the creature that hunted him. The fog seemed to close in around him, thickening with every breath he took, and the trees loomed like sentinels, their branches reaching out to ensnare him. The whispers that had once been distant now grew louder, more frantic, as if the swamp itself were alive, urging him onward even as it sought to trap him. The traveler's lungs burned, and his legs ached, but he dared not stop. Behind him, he could hear the cannibal's footsteps, a relentless rhythm that matched his own, always just a few paces behind. The creature was toying with him, drawing out the chase, savoring the terror that it could sense in its prey. The traveler stumbled over a root, nearly falling, but he caught himself just in time, his heart hammering in his chest. He could feel the creature's presence growing closer, could hear its breath hot on the back of his neck. Desperation clawed at him, and he pushed himself harder, faster, even though he knew that there was no escape. The swamp was a living, breathing entity, and it had already claimed him as its own. The cannibal was merely the instrument of its will, and the traveler was nothing more than the next victim in a long line of the damned. As the traveler stumbled through the darkness, he found himself drawn to a faint light flickering in the distance. Desperate for any sign of hope, he made his way toward it, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The light led him to an old abandoned shack, its walls sagging with age, its roof barely holding together. The stench of decay hit him as soon as he stepped inside, a sickening odor that turned his stomach and sent a wave of nausea through him. He gagged, covering his mouth with his hand as he struggled to keep his composure. But as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he realized with horror what he was seeing. The shack was filled with the remnants of the cannibal's past victims, bones, flesh, and rotting corpses, all arranged in a grotesque display of death. The walls were smeared with blood, the floor littered with the remains of those who had come before him. The traveler's legs gave out, and he collapsed to the ground, his mind reeling from the sheer horror of what he had discovered. This was no ordinary shack. This was the cannibal's lair, the place where it feasted on the flesh of the living. And now the traveler realized with a sinking feeling, he was the next course in the creature's unholy banquet. Panic set in as the traveler realized that he was not alone in the shack. The door, which had been closed when he entered, creaked open slowly, and the cannibal stepped inside, its presence filling the room with an oppressive, suffocating darkness. The traveler scrambled to his feet, his mind racing as he searched for a way out. But the shack was small, and there was no other exit. The windows were boarded up, the walls too thick to break through. He was trapped, caught in the cannibal's web with no hope of escape. The creature moved closer, its breath rasping in the darkness, its eyes gleaming with a twisted delight. The traveler could feel the heat of its presence and could smell the stench of death that clung to its rotting flesh. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind screaming at him to do something, anything to get away. But there was nowhere to go, no place to hide. The walls seemed to close in around him, the darkness growing thicker, more suffocating as the cannibal loomed over him. The traveler's hands trembled as he reached for a weapon, anything that he could use to defend himself, but his fingers found only emptiness. The cannibal let out a low, guttural growl, a sound that sent a shiver down the traveler's spine. He was trapped, and he knew it. The creature's hunger was palpable, and it would not be denied. As the cannibal took another step forward, the traveler realized with a sickening certainty that he was about to become the next victim in the monster's endless midnight feast. As the clock struck midnight, the air in the shack grew colder, the shadows lengthening as the cannibal prepared to feast. The traveler's scream echoed through the swamp, a desperate primal cry that pierced the stillness of the night. But there was no one to hear it, no one to come to his aid. The swamp had claimed him, just as it had claimed so many others before him. The cannibal moved with terrifying speed, its clawed hands reaching out to grasp the traveler, pulling him into its deadly embrace. The traveler struggled, fought with every ounce of strength he had left, but it was no use. The creature was too strong, too powerful, and the traveler was weak, his body already worn down by the endless chase. The cannibal's teeth gleamed in the dim light as it lowered its head, its breath hot and foul against the traveler's skin. There was a moment of terrible, heart-stopping anticipation, and then the creature struck, its jaws closing around the traveler with a sickening crunch. The pain was excruciating, a white-hot burst of agony that shot through the traveler's body, leaving him gasping for breath. The world around him blurred, his vision darkening as the life was drained from him. And yet, as his consciousness began to slip away, the traveler could feel a strange sense of peace. He was no longer afraid, terrified of the darkness that surrounded him. He was simply gone. The cannibal continued to feast, its hunger insatiable, its appetite never-ending. The traveler's body was just another offering, another sacrifice to the swamp's dark, malevolent power. And as the cannibal devoured the last remnants of its prey, the shadows in the shack seemed to grow thicker, darker, as if the swamp itself were feeding on the terror that had been unleashed within its depths. The traveler's spirit lingered in the swamp, caught in the liminal space between life and death. He was no longer bound by the physical limitations of his body, but the terror that had gripped him in life still clung to him like a shroud. As he drifted through the fog, he became aware of the countless other souls trapped in this cursed place, their forms faint and indistinct, mere shadows of what they once were. These spirits, like him, were victims of the swamp's dark curse, a curse that had plagued the land for centuries. The traveler could feel the weight of their despair, their fear, as they whispered of the swamp's origins, of the terrible events that had given rise to the Southern Cannibal, and the darkness that now ruled this forsaken place. It was a story of betrayal, of vengeance, and of blood, a tale as old as the swamp itself. Long ago, the land had been home to a thriving community, a place of life and prosperity. But greed and envy had poisoned the hearts of the people, and a terrible act of violence had unleashed a curse that could not be undone. The swamp had been born from this curse, its waters tainted with the blood of the innocent, its air thick with the cries of the damned. The Southern Cannibal was not just a creature of flesh and bone, he was the embodiment of the swamp's wrath, a twisted spirit of vengeance that could never be sated. The traveler, now a part of this dark history, could feel the pull of the curse, drawing him deeper into the swamp's embrace, as if the very land itself were claiming him as its own. The swamp was alive with a malevolent energy, its power growing stronger with each passing moment. The traveler could feel it pulsing beneath the surface, a dark force that seemed to be feeding off the fear and suffering of those who had dared to enter its domain. The trees, once mere sentinels of the swamp, now seemed to move with a life of their own, their branches swaying and twisting as if in response to some unseen command. The waters bubbled and churned as if the swamp were preparing to unleash its full fury upon the world. The traveler, now fully aware of the swamp's true nature, understood that the Southern Cannibal was not just a creature of legend. It was a manifestation of the swamp's anger, a twisted force of nature bent on punishing those who had wronged it. The swamp had been wronged, its lifeblood spilled in an act of unspeakable violence, and now it sought revenge against all who dared to enter its domain. The cannibal was merely the instrument of this revenge, a creature born of the swamp's hatred and driven by an insatiable hunger for flesh and blood. The traveler, now fully aware of his fate, could feel the swamp's power growing and could sense the darkness closing in around him. The swamp would not rest until it had consumed him, body and soul, and made him a part of its endless cycle of death and rebirth. He could see the other spirits, their forms distorted and twisted by the swamp's curse, their eyes filled with the same terror and despair that now consumed him. The swamp was alive, and it was hungry, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Even in death, the Southern Cannibal's hunger could not be satisfied. The traveler, now a ghostly observer, watched in horror as the creature continued its midnight feast, each new victim adding to the swamp's dark legacy. The cannibal was relentless, its appetite insatiable, its hunger unending. No matter how many lives it consumed, no matter how much blood it spilled, it could never be sated. The traveler could see the faces of the cannibal's victims, their eyes wide with terror, their screams echoing through the swamp as they met their grisly fate. The cannibal moved with a terrifying grace, its movements swift and fluid, as it tore into the flesh of its prey, its jaws dripping with blood. The swamp itself seemed to feed off this carnage, its waters growing darker, its trees more twisted and gnarled, as the cannibal's feast continued night after night. The traveler could feel the pull of the swamp's curse, drawing him ever closer to the darkness, to the place where the cannibal made its lair. He knew that he was destined to become a part of this endless cycle of death and horror, to be consumed by the swamp's insatiable hunger. The swamp was a living, breathing entity, and its hunger could never be satisfied. The traveler, now fully aware of his fate, could feel the darkness closing in around him and could sense the cannibal's presence, its eyes gleaming with a malevolent hunger. The swamp's curse had claimed another victim, and there was no escape from its unending hunger. The traveler's spirit, now bound to the swamp, found itself drifting among the countless other souls trapped in this cursed place. These were the lost ones, the victims of the Southern Cannibal and the swamp's dark curse, their forms faint and indistinct, mere shadows of the people they once were. The traveler could feel their despair, their madness, as they relived their final moments over and over again, trapped in an endless cycle of terror and death. The swamp had claimed them, body and soul, and now they were nothing more than phantoms, haunting the place where they had met their grisly end. The traveler could hear their voices, their whispers, as they recounted the horrors they had faced, the pain and fear that had consumed them in their last moments. These were the lost ones, the forgotten souls who had fallen victim to the swamp's curse, their stories now part of the swamp's dark history. The traveler could feel their madness, their despair, as they drifted aimlessly through the fog, their minds shattered by the terror they had experienced. The swamp had taken everything from them, their lives, their sanity, and now they were nothing more than shadows, lost in the darkness of the swamp. The traveler could feel the pull of the swamp's curse, drawing him closer to the lost ones, to the place where their stories ended and his own began. The swamp was a place of madness, of terror, and there was no escape from its grasp. As the traveler's spirit drifted through the swamp, his grip on reality began to slip. The line between the living and the dead blurred, and he found himself seeing visions of horrors long past. The swamp, it seemed, was revealing its darkest secrets to him, showing him the terrible events that had given rise to the curse that now consumed it. The travelers could see the faces of those who had wronged the land, their eyes wide with terror as they met their grisly fate. He could see the blood that had been spilled and the lives that had been taken, all in the name of greed and power. The swamp had been a place of life once, a thriving community, but that life had been snuffed out in a single terrible act of violence. The traveler could feel the pain of the land, the anguish of the spirits who had been wronged, their cries of vengeance echoing through the darkness. The swamp was a place of horror, a place where the past and the present collided in a maelstrom of terror and death. The traveler could see the visions of the past, the faces of the dead, their eyes filled with the same terror that now consumed him. The swamp was alive with the memories of those who had fallen victim to its curse, their stories etched into the very fabric of the land. The traveler could feel the darkness closing in around him, the visions growing more vivid, more terrifying, as the swamp revealed its true nature. This was a place of horror, of madness, and there was no escape from its grasp. The traveler's final descent into madness was complete. He could no longer tell where the swamp ended and he began, the darkness consuming his body and soul. The visions of horror that had plagued him now seemed like distant memories, replaced by a terrible, all-consuming emptiness. The swamp had claimed him, just as it had claimed so many others before him, and there was no escape from its grasp. The traveler could feel the darkness closing in around him, could hear the whispers of the lost ones, their voices echoing in his mind, urging him to join them in the shadows. The swamp was a place of madness, a place where the living and the dead were the same, and the traveler was now a part of it, a mere shadow of the man he had once been. The cannibal's curse had claimed another victim, adding to the growing shadows that haunted the swamp. The traveler could feel the pull of the darkness, drawing him ever closer to the place where the cannibal made its lair. He knew that he was destined to become a part of the swamp's dark history, to be consumed by the same curse that had claimed so many before him. The swamp was alive with the memories of those who had fallen victim to its curse, their stories etched into the very fabric of the land. The traveler could feel the darkness closing in around him, could sense the cannibal's presence, its eyes gleaming with a malevolent hunger. The swamp's curse had claimed another victim, and there was no escape from its unending hunger. On the traveler's final night, the swamp revealed the cannibal's true form, a monstrous being born of the darkest fears and the swamp's cursed history. The traveler, now fully aware of his fate, could see the creature for what it truly was, a twisted spirit of vengeance, a force of nature that had been corrupted by the swamp's curse. The cannibal was no longer just a man, it was a being of pure darkness, its form twisted and distorted by the power of the swamp. The creature's eyes gleamed with a malevolent intelligence, its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin as it prepared to feast on the traveler's soul. The traveler could feel the darkness closing in around him, could hear the whispers of the lost ones, their voices urging him to join them in the shadows. The swamp was alive with the memories of those who had fallen victim to its curse, their stories etched into the very fabric of the land. The traveler could feel the darkness closing in around him, could sense the cannibal's presence, its eyes gleaming with a malevolent hunger. The swamp's curse had claimed another victim, and there was no escape from its unending hunger. In a desperate attempt to escape, the traveler fought back against the cannibal, but the swamp was unforgiving, and every step was met with resistance as if the very ground conspired against him. The trees loomed above him, their branches swaying and twisting as if in response to some unseen command. The waters bubbled and churned as if the swamp were preparing to unleash its full fury upon the world. The traveler could feel the darkness closing in around him, could hear the whispers of the lost ones, their voices urging him to join them in the shadows. The swamp was alive with the memories of those who had fallen victim to its curse, their stories etched into the very fabric of the land. The traveler could feel the darkness closing in around him, could sense the cannibal's presence, its eyes gleaming with a malevolent hunger. The swamp's curse had claimed another victim, and there was no escape from its unending hunger. The traveler fought with every ounce of strength he had left, but it was no use. The cannibal was too strong, too powerful, and the swamp itself seemed to conspire against him. The traveler could feel the darkness closing in around him, could hear the whispers of the lost ones, their voices urging him to join them in the shadows. The swamp's curse had claimed another victim, and there was no escape from its unending hunger. The struggle ended as suddenly as it began. The swamp fell silent, its darkness swallowing the last remnants of the traveler. All that remained were the creeping shadows and the faint echoes of a scream that would never be heard again. The swamp had claimed another victim, its hunger sated for the moment, but the darkness was never satisfied. The cannibal, its appetite temporarily quenched, retreated into the shadows, its eyes gleaming with a malevolent hunger. The swamp, once again at peace, settled into its eerie stillness, its waters calm, its trees swaying gently in the breeze. But the silence was deceiving, for the swamp's curse was ever present, its darkness lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to venture too close. The traveler's story had come to an end, his fate sealed in the darkness of the swamp, but the curse lived on. The swamp would continue to claim victims, its hunger never ending, its darkness ever growing. The silence that now enveloped the swamp was only temporary, a brief respite before the next scream echoed through the trees, and the next life was claimed by the darkness. The swamp's curse was eternal, and there was no escape from its grasp. The legend of the Southern Cannibal grew as new whispers spread among the locals. The swamp's curse continued to claim victims, each one adding to the swamp's evil power. The darkness that had consumed the traveler was now a part of the swamp, his story etched into the very fabric of the land. The swamp was a place of death and despair, where the living and the dead were the same. The locals, now fully aware of the danger that lurked in the swamp, kept their distance. But the whispers of the lost ones continued to spread, drawing the curious and the brave into the darkness. The swamp was a living, breathing entity, and its hunger could never be satisfied. The cannibal, its appetite never ending, continued to feast on the souls of those who dared to enter its domain. The swamp's curse was eternal, and there was no escape from its grasp. The traveler's story was just one of many. His fate was sealed in the darkness of the swamp, but his story would be told for generations to come. The swamp was a place of horror, a place where the living and the dead were the same, and the darkness that lurked within it would continue to grow, feeding on the fear and despair of those who dared to enter its domain. Years later, a diary was found, detailing the traveler's terrifying experience. The pages were worn and tattered, stained with the dampness of the swamp and the blood of the author. The words within were barely legible, but the fear that radiated from them was palpable. The diary told the story of the traveler's journey into the forbidden swamp, of the horrors he had faced, and of the Southern Cannibal that had claimed his life. The diary was a testament to the darkness that lurked within the swamp, a warning to those who might be tempted to follow in the traveler's footsteps. But as the new owner of the diary read the final entry, they felt a chill run down their spine, a warning that the cannibal was still out there, watching, waiting. The diary was a relic of the past, but the darkness it described was alive, its hunger never ending. The swamp was a place of death and despair, and the diary was just one of many stories that would be told about its horrors. The new owner of the diary could feel the pull of the darkness and could sense the presence of the cannibal, lurking just beyond the edges of their vision. The swamp's curse was eternal, and there was no escape from its grasp. Are you craving more spine-chilling tales? Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to never miss a new story. Join us for more terrifying journeys into the unknown, where suspense and horror lurk around every corner. And don't forget to share your thoughts and suggestions for our next video in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Stay tuned if you dare.